Welcome, photographers. This is Todd Lewis coming to you from Charles Lewis Photography in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today we are talking about something that we don't tend to talk about nearly as much as the business stuff. We're actually going to be talking about photography today. Photography, because guess what? In your photography business, your photography is important. Just because we talk mostly about the business side, the marketing, the selling, the pricing, the merchandising, all of that very important stuff that has the power to make you great profits in your photography business, it by no means means that the photography itself is not important. And you know what? I'm excited to get to talk photography today, but I'm especially excited because I get to have these two incredible photographers joining me and talking about it. First and foremost, my father, who's on the bottom of the screen there, Charles Lewis. Hello, Dad, and welcome.
Hi, Todd. Hi, Tom. And welcome. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, how excited are you to get to talk about photography a little bit for a change?
Oh, it's fantastic because that's our first love is photography and creating beautiful images. It's great.
It sure is. Yeah, absolutely. Well, great to have you here. And the two of you know far more about this stuff than I do, although I have learned an awful lot that I've applied to being a cinematographer in addition to working in the photography industry. And it's amazing the how much the principles are almost identical in cinematography and photography. Tom Morelli from Brewer, Maine, photographer who's making great profits in his photography business every single day, including right now. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But Tom, how excited are you to get to talk about photography today?
This is great because, so often we talk about marketing and merchandising and all the things that keep the phone ringing, how to properly run your business. But you do have to have a portrait photography business that produces something that's maybe a next step above what your clients and prospects can produce at home. Something with that wow factor, something where they look fantastic and they just can't do by themselves. Gives you that little leg up over somebody that's just sort of a point and shoot, to use a bad term.
You bet. Absolutely. Well, let's show some posing here. Oh, wait, what is this? What are we looking at here? Okay, we had to have a little bit of fun here to start us off with. Taking a look at an old photograph here of a camera room circa, I don't know, the Middle Ages. No, not quite that far.
Middle Ages.
We're talking the turn of the previous century here.
Yes.
And look at that poor child there. That poor child. Does that look like a comfortable pose? Now, today we're going to be talking, obviously we're talking how to pose groups perfectly every time. Okay, but I wanted to start with this because Tom is such a big part of what he does in addition to family portraiture is baby photography. And I found these two images on Tom's Facebook page, and I wanted to contrast that photograph. I love old-time photographs, by the way. There's something about old-time photographs that just really pull me in. But I think we can all agree that photograph of that baby doesn't look nearly as lovely and natural and wonderful as this image here. Tom, talk a little bit about that image there just very quickly and why you love doing what you do so much.
Well, first of all, the late 1800s baby, that probably that dress looked great once that baby grew up and got married in the same dress. That is what you call a mega christening gown. Yeah, nowadays baby portrait photography is all about being natural. And what people see is that peaches and cream skin tones and that softness and the baby sleeping. It's really important to capture those things. And so our baby plan is really busy with that type of photography as well. And we also photograph a lot of families within the baby plan. That's what pertains to today.
Yeah, the same principles apply to family photography as they do to the baby photography, obviously. And that's kind of why I wanted to share that. I loved juxtaposing and showing how important the pose is, the expression, all of that. I mean, that one baby, there's just no comparison into which one of those is going to elicit the true emotion. Now, first of all, we got to talk about why you should listen to us, why you should listen to three guys who, let's not kid ourselves, we're not spring chickens. We're also not 1 foot in the grave either. We've got great energy. We've got great passion. But most importantly, we also have great experience. Our years and years in the photography business means that we have found the things that work and work extraordinarily well, no matter what else is going on in the world, no matter what's going on in the economy, what's going on in the photographic industry itself. And that's why, in my opinion, you shouldn't be seeking out the people who are just the newbies, who's the newest, latest, doing the newest, latest, greatest stuff, because it hasn't necessarily been proven to work over years, over decades, over generations. So what we pride ourselves in is being on the cutting edge of the technology aspect of everything, but doing it always first and foremost from a point of how does this stuff really work? How does it work to bring us the right types of clients that we love, the types of clients that we want to work with, and do it time and time again? So I wanted to start the program out first and foremost by saying why you should listen to us, because you should be asking yourself that very important question. All right, next up, why does your photographic business exist? Now, when we're talking the business side, it becomes obvious why we're asking this question. Why does your photo business exist? Because your answer should be it exists to give yourself the lifestyle that you want to have. The sense of security, the profitability, a sustainability in your business, and being able to do that on the hours that you want to work each week. But now we're talking photography. Why is this so important when it comes to your photography itself? Well, because that's why you became a photographer in the first place. You probably didn't become a photographer because you saw this as a way to get rich quick. You did it because something about the world of photography lit a fire under you, and you wanted to make that the way you make your living. So, Dad, I want to turn it to you first. Why did you become a photographer in the first place?
Oh, I love photography. Absolutely loved photography. And back when I was still in college, I started my own little photography business just because I loved it so much. But then I figured out that if you really work at this and look at the business side of it as well as the artistic side of it, you can earn a darn good living doing something you love to do. I mean, what better is that? And that's why I'm here.
And again, but the reason he got into it is the love and the passion for the photography itself. Tom, how about you? Why did you get in the photography business in the first place?
This really fits in with today's subject. I found that as I was doing my little amateur photography in high school, that people really responded, oftentimes with tears, at seeing their images of their babies or their families together, because really that's what means the most to all of us is our loved ones. So for me, portrait photography rather than product photography really appealed because I loved the reaction I got from the people that are in the portraits.
Absolutely. So the important thing is to always remember to remind yourself of why you got in the photographic business in the first place. And that's what I'm touching on here, is the balance between a profitable, successful business and the love of why you're doing it. And we always want to find that good balance. And what we're talking about today with posing groups fits very nicely into that, because how you pose your groups is a double-edged sword. It's a two-sided coin, right? On one side of that coin, you've got, how do I like to pose groups? Do I like to have them be candid and be just running around in a field and have it be very action oriented? Or do I like to have them very specifically and beautifully posed and positioned so that the composition itself looks incredible, or somewhere in between? That's on one side. What do you like to do as an artist? The other side of that coin is, what does your target market want? What does your target market want? Because that's the business side, right? Now, if you can find a way to balance those two and have both sides of those coin be the same thing, you're living in a perfect world. But oftentimes what your clients are going to want is not necessarily what you love to do the most, right, Dad?
Right on. The real important thing here is to listen to your clients. You can guide them as to the clothing, the makeup, the hair, the location, the posing, all that stuff. But, you want to find out what people want and then help them to get that they want.
Absolutely. And Tom has made this the cornerstone of his business as well, is finding that balance between what he loves to do and what the clients, the target market, that's the key, knowing your target market. Everything we're going to be talking about and showing you today through the images we show you and the strategies that Tom has put together of posing them and so forth are all designed to appeal to our target market, not to appeal to everyone because nobody's got the same taste, but we've figured out exactly what our target market is, who our target market is, and we're going to make sure that we're appealing to them in every possible way. All right. So again, why did you become a photographer in the first place? You did it because you love the photography. Now let's make sure you're making a great living by combining that photography with great business sense and appealing to our target market each and every time. Now, how is this working for you, Tom? So maybe you could just, take a minute or two to talk about a recent a family portrait session, let's say a group, okay, photographic session that you did. How was that process? How was doing the photographic session itself? And then what was that sale like?
Yeah, boy, I got a ton of examples. Just recently, I was photographing a family. They'd had a recent high school graduate that I photographed. There were 6 people in the family, 2 dogs, which I love, and proper preparation made it so it was all really fun. We did several subgroups. We did all kinds of things that made it meaningful to them, like going to their home. And this ended up in a 4-figure sale, which is $2,900, including a wall size that they love that's in their home. Looks beautiful. They were thrilled. They got some gift sizes, and that happens regularly. That's not an exception to the rule by any means.
I mean, that's great. $2,900 sale. Now, for some photographers, that seems impossible. How could you ever make that much money from one portrait session? For others, they might be, well, I can make even a little bit more than that. $2,900, I don't think there's anyone that's watching this video that wouldn't love to have that. Now, how does that fit within your typical average, would you say, for a family or group portrait session?
The average for that type of group is $2,840. I looked up the numbers before we did this. So that was kind of right on beam. There's sort of a theme there with that size group. Larger groups, often it's a larger investment. Smaller groups are maybe a little less than that. Depends on what the makeup of the group is.
Okay, great. So you can see, and this is right now. This is happening right now. And I wanted to find out, how is this working for Tom? Again, why you're listening to us, years and years of experience. And when you see the portraits, you're going to see the exact types of portraits that Tom is doing on a regular basis to appeal to that target market. So first off, let's kind of roll over the process here a little bit. Tom, at the design consultation chat, part of what you do during that design consultation is you find out the number of people in the group, their relationships to each other, their ages, etc., so that you can start pre-planning the posing. Kind of just give us a 30 to 60 second overview of kind of what that's like. We're going to get into more detail about it in a bit.
Yeah, this sort of breaks the ice. This allows people to decide if you're the right photographer. And once they've made that decision, it allows you to find out exactly what they're looking for. And we have different samples and so forth that they can look at and tell me their likes and dislikes. It also lets me know ahead of time how to prepare to photograph that group. So the day of the photography, there's no guesswork.
Right, absolutely. That design consultation is a very important step, both for the sale and for preparing for the photographic session itself. Okay, so the next key point to keep in mind here is that you're going to this may come as a surprise to some photographers, that you're actually going to physically draw a plan of where to put each person in the group. Now, Tom, I'm guessing there are probably a lot of photographers out there that don't take this step. Why is this step so important to you?
This is really fun, actually. I do this visually, mentally in my head, but sometimes somebody will say, we've got a group of 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, and this is not in front of the client. This is when I'm alone planning this out. Start with one head and then another couple, and just do this tonight. Start doing this after this program and add people. How many people can I get in here following the principles we're going to talk about in a few minutes here, and try to set it up so it looks pleasing? Can you draw it and not put 8 people in a straight line, but do something interesting? That way, when you arrive at the session, you already kind of have an idea in your head. This kind of looked like a nice arrangement of that number of people. You don't always have to do that, but I think it really helps just to sit down and sketch it out and try to figure out where you're going to put people.
Right, because every second that you can save during the photographic session itself, where you don't have to be doing that pre-planning stuff, is time that you can spend with the client. Right. Getting the right expressions, getting them comfortable, making sure they're comfortable together. That's what we want to be spending our time on, not going, well, okay, now I got you all here. Should I put you there and put you there? You don't want to be, that all needs to be done ahead of time. And doing that through that, drawing it out kind of thing is really wonderful. Now, Tom, are you you're going to show us an example of that coming up here, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I did a quick little sketch, and we'll look at some other things here. Where you physically draw out ahead of time, and what you're going to see me draw actually ended up being a real group.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, you don't have to be a good sketch artist in order to be able to do this. And it doesn't take long. You'll see how Tom does it here in just a moment. So physically draw out that plan. And do you do that for each? So if as we're going to talk about in a minute, you're going to maybe break them up into other groups. Do you do that for the smaller groups as well as the larger groups?
You can do that. I've done this for so many years that I don't really find it necessary. But looking within that group, I already know the relationships, so I already kind of know what I'm going to do. I don't just show up and do potluck photography. There
you go. And next up, it's not about the quantity of poses. It's about getting 2 or 3 really great ones. That's all it takes. So many photographers think, I got to do all sorts of setups, so it makes it seem like I'm busy and like we've done a whole ton of. They don't care about that. And neither should you. All that they're going to care about is getting that 1 or 2 images that they adore. Our best sale that we ever had, we had 1 great image to show them. And that's all it took. Got us the best sale that we've ever had before. Right, Dan?
That's right. Yeah, and another important point here is that you arrive early enough on the location, or you prep your studio if you're doing it there, so that you can set up the needed posing helpers and lighting. And Tom's going to talk about the posing helpers and stuff in just a minute, but you want to allow yourself enough time to be able to create something really stunning.
Yeah, that's absolutely what this is about. You've got posing helpers that are going to help you with that. We're going to show you some that Tom uses and how he utilizes them in each of the images. So make sure you're bringing posing helpers with you. And then, of course, you've got whatever auxiliary lighting gear you might need as well to supplement whatever wonderful lighting Mother Nature has given you on that particular day. And always bring more equipment and posing helpers than you think you may need, because it's better to have them and not need them than wish you'd had them and you don't have them there. All right, next up here, the next step in this whole process is the goal is to make everyone look great by themselves and also within the group. They must look the very best that they've ever looked, or at least at this point in their lives, okay, while still looking natural and looking like themselves. When you can do that, that right there is what earns you your money. That's what makes the difference between what we do as fine portrait photographers and somebody who takes something with a high pixel smartphone or even digital SLR camera and then applies some sort of filter to it that makes them look, painted, but not like themselves. We want them looking like themselves, natural, capturing those images, those relationships between everybody. So again, make them look great by themselves. If you singled each person out in this image, you could almost take that and make a single portrait of that person by themselves. But then when you put them together, they all look beautiful, largely because of the way the poses are done here. And we'll show you how he created. We might even be showing you that actual image coming up here. I'm not sure, but one with certainly a lot of people in it. Start with the center of the group and work out to the edges. Tom, why is this so important?
Family photography is all about relationships. That's why they called you in the first place, because they love each other and there is a family structure. And a lot of times, if you're very fortunate, it might even be great grandparents or grandparents, and then moms and dads, and then the children. And so I always start as sort of the revered spot. I take the eldest, I don't say this to them, but grandparents, and build around them to show that family structure. And I'll jokingly say, if it wasn't for you two, I'd have the day off. And they all laugh because the whole family's there because of me photographing them, and they started this lovely family that's their descendants. So always start in the middle and work out. Plus, you want to make sure the group is properly constructed, as we're going to look at, and that's where to start. And then as you add on, you'll see the group start to form. If you try to start it on either end, it's like baking a cake halfway, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. The next key point, which ties into that a little bit, is to try to avoid rows where there's a lot of space between people posed in the front, middle, and back. You don't want to have them stacked like rows. You want to have nice levels to it and so forth. And Tom's going to show kind of some examples of that again. And it makes a massive difference in the quality of the work. And again, making your work stand out from the snapshots that somebody might take. We're professionals, and it's the posing that makes up a massive part of what sets professional images apart from amateur images. The posing and the lighting are so very important. The next key point here to keep in mind is to be careful to keep all the faces relatively equidistant from the camera lens. This is a huge one. We're going to talk more detail about this in a minute, but basically this is, first of all, to make sure that they're all in focus. You want to make sure that every face is in focus, and sometimes it's hard to tell. No matter how large of a screen you might have or a monitor there or whatever you're utilizing, it can be really hard to tell that each and every one of them is super sharp. So make sure you take the time to make sure that they are all equidistant from the camera lens. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do that a little bit later here, but we've got a trick that is the most low-tech trick. Some of you may have heard of this. Some of you may still use it. It's the best thing we have ever found for making sure that everyone is equidistant from the lens, and we'll show you exactly what that is in just a minute here. All right, next up here, no heads next to each other on the same level. In addition to the rows, the back and the forth and so forth, you want to make sure that you don't have heads that are on the same level. The example what we're showing here is, yes, the two guys are close in level, but you can see the guy on the left, screen left, is a little taller than the guy on screen right. So you've got heads on different levels. And that's where posing helpers can become very helpful as well. You can get people on different levels, especially when you get larger groups. Then you can have somebody sitting on something, somebody on this little posing helper here to get their head size a little bit lower. The heads on, again, this is one of the big mistakes that I see a lot of amateur photographers that are wanting to be professionals, but they're not quite there yet, is they're stacking people next to each other, and it just does not look pleasing to the eye at all. So very important to keep that in mind. All right, next up here, use the pleasing pyramid posing principle. Tom, very quickly, what is this principle? We're going to show them examples of this and go into more detail in just a bit.
There's lots of reasons to like this, but basically it gives you a base. So the family looks like they're kind of structured in a way they're not going to tip over or fall over, and they're not heavy on one side or the other. And the pyramid, there are other shapes, but the pyramid is really the one I default to the most because it's easy to build when you start in the middle and add people on. And it's just pleasing to the eye, and it usually allows people to lean in and be close, look like there's closeness in the family, which is another part of it. A lot of times I see people doing poses and people are standing far apart. They're not close to each other, and that's not what you want to show.
Right. And a huge money-making point on all of this, and this is a huge one, is make sure that you break down the large groups into smaller groups as well as you're going forward. Don't just photograph the large family. Take that large family, break them down into the subgroups within that family, if you will, and make sure you photograph them. That's a huge money-making point. You don't want to miss that. We'll show you more examples here in just a minute of exactly how Tom does that. Okay, so now that's what to do. Now let's dive into exactly how to do it. So first and foremost, we're going to show you a number of images in each of these areas that we just talked about. We're going to show you the principles that we just revealed, but in a visual way that will make everything super clear to you. And Tom is also going to share, as we promised, the sketching pre-plan, so you can see exactly how this helps so very much, and of course, much, much more. So here we go. Let's dive right into our first major point here. So here, we talked about physically drawing a plan of where to put each person in the group. And here you're seeing Tom sketch that out. So this was the Smith family. And look at this. This doesn't take long. This is pretty simple. Tom, go ahead and talk about what's happening here.
Yeah, I knew I wanted a horizontal composition already. And I'm drawing, you can't see the words, but I wrote dad and mom just to give me a reference. So I know that's how I start off with a couple, roughly. And then they had 4 daughters in this group. So DTR stands for daughter. And I just thought, well, that's the oldest daughter. I'll put her there and I'll build around I noticed the relationship. The little one liked to cling to the other one. So I'll put her there. I'll put the baby in the middle. So there's 4 daughters, mom and dad. And they also have a cute dog, which I just wrote, as you'll see, Pop. That's my dog. And that's known as Pup. You can tell I'm a far better artist with a camera than I am with my hand. But there's our basic triangle, and I knew that's where I'd start. So it gives me a prompt, and we put that with our notes. So, but perhaps as I'm headed to the photography session at their home, this one was, I already have an idea. Oh yeah, that's kind of how I thought this group might go, and I'm not just starting cold when I get there.
Yeah, it saves so much time getting to do that. It's such an important, and again, it doesn't have to look fancy. And you're never under any circumstances going to ever show this to the client. This is just for you, the photographer. So again, it doesn't matter what it looks like, but it's getting that pre-planning done ahead of time. Now, we talked about the importance of posing helpers, arriving early enough on location so you can, or your studio, if you're doing these in your studio, so that you can prep the posing helpers and the lighting and so forth. Talk about the important, we're not going to dive into the lighting on this program. That's going to be one of our future programs on the Online Vault, maybe even next month. Spoiler alert, maybe. We'll see. We might talk about the lighting side of all of this. But let's focus on the posing. What are posing helpers, first of all, Tom?
Yeah, you have to give people a place to sit or stand or relax or recline as you're doing the posing. Also, it allows you to put their heads at the levels you're hoping for within the group. And we try first to find natural, whether it's rocks or furniture at the client's home. So I try not to use anything that wouldn't normally be in their home or in nature, but you can successfully use those and hide them sometimes with grass or other things, or part of a skirt might go down over the edge of a posing block or something. So outdoors, trash bags are great because the ground can be wet or muddy. You don't want to make your clients sit in their nice clothes on the ground. And you tuck those in and hide those so you don't have to worry about photoshopping them out. And at their home, again, you're using their furniture. It makes a whole lot more sense. I don't bring things in unless I really need them, and usually they're hidden just to change heights a little bit. And the same thing in the park, the beach, whatever natural posing helpers, sand dunes that are going down sideways where they can pose uphill a little bit. There's just keep your eyes open for things like that before you introduce artificial elements. But you do need these, some of these following things sometimes to help out the pose and the composition.
Yeah, and the another important thing that I want to point out is the third thing down, which is to use their furniture in their home. But
Right.
you want to make sure that you don't move things around so much that it doesn't look like their home anymore.
Right.
That it doesn't feel like their home. I mean, it's okay to move the sofa a little bit, or to move a chair, or to bring a chair in from somewhere else in the house than it would normally be, or at least somewhere else in the living room, okay? But you want to make sure there's a very fine balance there, right, Dad?
Definitely. You've got to balance it so that you've got, what I like to do is I like to light it. The main light will be on the side of wherever the big window is that naturally brings light in, so that at least that looks normal to them. And move the furniture maybe a little closer together, maybe a little, but nothing major, because then it just doesn't look right to them.
Yeah, especially if they're going to end up displaying this in that home.
Yeah.
Maybe even in that very room. So
Right,
there's a
right.
very, very fine line of what you can get away with and what you can't get away with when you're doing that. All right. So we're showing you here on the screen. These are a few of ours at Charles Lewis Photography. These are some posing helpers that we've utilized over the years for when you're primarily photographing either outdoors or in a location that's not in their home. Or these are also very easy to hide. You know, if you pose them properly, you won't really notice what they're sitting on. So sometimes these can be used for, smaller children or something that are going to be seated in front of others, but wonderful usage outdoors. You can see on the left image there, screen left, that's them folded up. Okay, and they fold up real small, and they got a little handle on the top there, you can see. And then when you open up there in the center, that's kind of what they look like. Very sturdy. I don't know, what the weight limit would be of somebody that you'd want to sit on this, but I feel I would feel comfortable putting somebody that, weighs maybe 170, 200 pounds, 250 pounds maybe even, but very, very sturdy. And there on the right, you can kind of see a side view of what that might look like when it's all together. Really nice, Dad. I know you've utilized these a lot throughout the years, and they're different heights, as you can sort of tell there. One is a little bit shorter than the other. I think we might have even had one or two more of these at some point that I didn't have access to when I created this image. But anything you want to add about that, Dan?
No, it's just so important to have things that allow you to have different heights of people's heads.
Yeah, absolutely. And out on location, you can use things like logs, rocks, things like that, but use the trash bags so that they don't get their clothes dirty if they're sitting on something that's been out there. You know, that's always good to be able to do as well, putting people on their knees and things like that for different heights, head heights and so forth. Tom, let's take a look at some of your posing helpers that you've used. You've got slightly different ones than we have. Now, do you utilize, on the left there, you've got those boxes there,
right.
And then in the middle, you've got some stools, and on the right, some stools. Now, are these posing helpers that you use, do you use these in your studio? Do you take them on location? Both? Kind of talk us through what we're looking at here.
The posing helpers on the left, I take everywhere, and they all wrap up into one big carry-on bag. So they all zip up. They're nylon over hard plastic, so they're washable. So I use those everywhere I go. And they are very, very easy to hide because they're dark. Even if one peeks through, it's easy to Photoshop a piece of grass or a dress over it, but I usually can hide them fairly well. They also are great for putting under children's feet. So if you're doing a group and you need little Johnny to be just another 3 inches taller and get that perfect triangle composition, that'll work, and you don't have to worry about them breaking or falling. The middle ones and the ones on the right, all the stools are primarily in my studio, because there are people posed in front of them, so that they don't, you never want those to show at all. They're nothing you want to have in the photograph, but they're good for getting heights, so they're posing it. Sometimes people perch. The white one in the middle is quite tall, and I'll get somebody that's tall, and I've got to bring them down in a group a little bit, so they'll perch on the edge of that and lean forward, as we're going to talk about, and it lowers their height. So ones on the left go everywhere. Ones in the middle and the right are primarily for the studio.
Yeah, those are great examples, Tom, because again, it shows lots of different variations that you can do with that. And the ones that involve, that might be seen, the stools and so forth, let's take a look at those again. The stools look really nice. I mean, those will photograph well, and you've got a wide range of variety, and the ones in the middle will stand out a little bit more. So you might be able to make those part of the image instead of trying to hide them. And then, of course, those boxes on the left are very easy to hide. They just fade into the background. People aren't going to notice those at all when you utilize them correctly. Wonderful points. All right. The next point here that we want to be sure to talk about, and again, these are all the keys to posing groups, mostly outdoors here, but also indoors. The goal is to make everyone look great by themselves and also within the group. Okay, they must look the best they have ever looked, at least at this point in their lives. Now, I want to stress that again. The goal is to not say, I'll fix that in Photoshop. We want to avoid those words whenever possible. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to do some enhancement. Of course we are. Some blemish removal, maybe even a little bit of... But see, when you get into removing blemishes, when you get into removing wrinkles, when you get into touching up the eye bags, you run the risk now of them not looking like themselves anymore. And they're not going to want to display a portrait in their living room that every time they look at it, they go, well, I just look like I was on an ego trip and I told him to airbrush everything off of me. Oh, I hate that, right? So, Dad, I want to go to you first about how important this balance is for you and so forth. And then, Tom, we'll go to you as well.
Yeah, you just don't want to make it look like they have been, glamorized or made up. You don't want to go too far. I'd rather go less far than too far on the retouching and the enhancement. I want them to look like we caught them on a really good day. I mean, it still looks like them, but we caught them on a really good day and they look very nice. That's what I'm after. And Tom, how do you feel about that?
Exactly the same way. In my earlier years of Photoshop, particularly when we made the swap, the tendency was to over-retouch because you could. It's like, wow, this is kind of neat. And people would say, you've removed all the personality and character from that person's face. Put it back.
Yeah.
So, and in reference to the slide we're looking at that family, it is true. If you're photographing a family and you look at the parts and say, if I took everyone else away and it was just that one person, would they look comfortable and good in that particular pose? And usually that's a result of me seeing photographs where people are straight on, their shoulders and their head are straight on, they're standing like wooden soldiers, and they're all in a line, and that's the group. And that's what you want to avoid. You need body angle, you need dynamics, you need to make them look comfortable, and then you build the group around them.
that's the key point there. I love that you just made is how does this relate to posing? Well, because how you pose them is going to change how natural they look.
Right.
And then you don't have to go in there in Photoshop and try and figure out, why doesn't she look natural? Is it her smile? Is it her eyes? Is she squinting too much? No, it might have just been the pose.
Yeah.
Or it might have even been the context of the pose that she's in, juxtaposed against the pose. That's a lot of poses. Juxtaposed against the pose of the person that's posed next to him.
I suppose.
Nicely played. Nicely played. All right. So keep that in mind whenever you're posing them. How are you? And also, the pose is also affected by how they look in conjunction with the lighting. You know, because if you turn their head a little bit more this way, the lighting might be a little bit better on their face, makes them look that much better while still looking natural. Now, Tom, we're talking about helping them to look their very best. Looking at this image here, what did you want to single out here?
Well, you know, within each group, this is kind of where I was. The mom, in particular, was just a hoot to work with. I love this family; they were great, but her personality was. I use the word sassy, but in a good way. Like she was very sweet, but she's just like so fun to work with. And she folded her arms a lot. She's always like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And she'd put her arms together. So we just had a lot of fun, and she fell into that pose kind of naturally. And a lot of times, good poses are reflections of something a person might. If you watch your clients and they're doing this and they're doing that, and suddenly you'll see, hey, that's something that might look good on them. So that's where I started with her, and it really fit her personality. And then I built the rest around them. And the same thing, this lovely group, these are so sweet, this sweet family. And one of the things we often say, and I say to my clients, because they're worried about the children and their hair and their outfits, and I'll say, you got to make the moms look good. And they're like, right on. Usually we get left out last. So I'm like, I want to make sure that the knee is bent and her head is turned from her shoulders. She's got a little body angle turned in toward her husband so that they look like they like each other, as I jokingly say. And so if you make sure the mom looks good, you're going to have a much better time at your projection appointment where you show them the portraits, because that's one of the first things she's going to look at. And here we have that thought of the heads are turned from the shoulders. We aren't doing everyone standing straight on. There's some dynamics. There's a little action going on, even though it's a still photograph. This ended up in like a 10-foot by 20-foot backlit slide in an auditorium in a marketing piece that I did several years ago, where the concerts, it was an Elton John concert. That portrait was seen by tons of people and got a lot of calls, and I really like that. Same thing here. This was a blended family. Sometimes you get families that are mom and dad are remarried, and the children are sort of separated, and they're not with their natural mom or dad, so they don't want to get into those real tight, close poses. That's where the consultation works. The girl in the end ended up being one of my high school senior ambassadors or representatives, and so I saw how she was standing. She kind of stood, little body angle, one shoulder higher than the other, head still turned toward me, great expression, that little knee bent rather than straight legs. So just keeping your eyes on those little things can really help, and as you build a group. So she's on one side with her mom and brother, and that's the way we constructed that group, starting from the middle out.
Fantastic. And like you said, that's the nice segue into this. Start with the center of the group and work out to the edges, usually starting with the eldest, whether it's the parents or the grandparents, and start with them in the center. So let's show some examples of that. Talk us through these, Tom.
Yeah, this was you'd call her the matriarch of the family. She's the grandma sitting in the middle, and she was just an absolute doll, but she also ruled the roost. So we did some beautiful portraits of her by herself after this, and as well as the family without her. But this was really what they were originally after. Her son, who's to her right, the gentleman with the lighter hair, was so proud of her and so loved her, and his wife is in the back. So we did that pyramid pose. The grandchildren are all huddled around, but this family kind of revolved around her. They did so much with and for her that we wanted to kind of show that. This is a dentist who has tons of my work on display in her offices. I love that. But started out same thing. She said, my mom and dad are never in any photographs. So we started off with that couple. Now, this is a little off center of starting right in the middle. But it was the way, because of the children and the babies being physically smaller, I didn't mind so much. They wanted to kind of keep them all on one side with their mom and dad. They've got 4 boys. But we started with them in the middle, and did a portrait there and built out from that, building that group. Same theory. Same thing here. Grandparents, this was my FedEx guy. And he said, hey, I love your work. I see it in here for years. It's time you photographed my family. And so that is he and his wife. And then we built around from them. And again, because of the children were all kind of weighted with two little families there, they were all kind of clustered, and all the single people were on the other side. But that's, again, as we'll see, how I built this one. Not so much pyramid, but it was built around the eldest, the mom and dad, or the grandparents in this case, were put in there first.
All right, fantastic stuff there. So again, starting with the center, working your way out. That's just a rule of thumb. It doesn't have to be something that you do every single time. There are, of course, exceptions to the rules and everything. But the next key point is, again, trying to avoid rows where there is a lot of space between people posed in the front, middle, and back. Tom, why don't you go ahead and talk us through a couple of examples here on that?
Yeah, we've talked about this before as far as not having people any closer or further. They should all be equidistant from the lens to keep them in focus. And so a lot of times to create that illusion, this real simple portrait of a mom with her two children, the young lady had to be in the back, so I just had her sit really straight, and I say bend forward at the belt buckle, if they have a belt buckle, or at the waist. Keep your shoulders straight, no hunching, and it brings their nose and their eyes a lot closer and in with the people, so there's not a back row and a front row. It's all equal distance from the camera. And also, you'll notice perspective-wise, if someone is behind or in front, the person behind looks smaller. It's just an optical principle, and the person in the back looks, in the front looks bigger, and that's not flattering usually. So in this case, we have mom lean toward the lens, and sometimes they'll make a comment. She just feels kind of, I don't normally stand like this. I'm like, trust me, it'll look great. We want you to look terrific. I'll take good care of you. And so if she was to stand up straight and lean back as she was, she'd have physically appear smaller, which isn't necessarily always a bad thing, but she just wouldn't look like part of the group. So just had her do a gentle lean at the waist in, and it really made a difference in that.
Fantastic. All right. So yeah, and that lean forward, it helps with that distortion of sometimes making the person in the back look smaller in comparison, and it's getting their heads sizes relatively equidistant from the lens, which is our next important point here, making sure that their faces are equidistant from the lens. So let's show a couple of examples of that, and then we'll talk about the secret sauce to how you do that, the super, super high-tech way that you can make sure that all the faces are equidistant. Go ahead, Tom.
We try to avoid rows. We had a pretty big group here, but I had the back, quote unquote, row lean forward, come in as close as they could, get rid of all the space between them and the people in front of them so that they are relatively the same distance from the lens, so that we don't get a focus problem, we don't get a perspective problem. And you just have to explain to people as you're doing it, you're saying, I want to make sure you guys are just as important as the people in the front. Stand up straight, we're going to lean you in, and I go back and make sure that they're equidistant. And I think you have a secret sauce you're going to reveal on this.
Yeah, Dad, I'm going to turn it over to you. What is the super high-tech way that you make sure that all the faces are equidistant from the camera?
Well, this is a little expensive, but it's really worth the investment, I assure you. And I call it stringing, where I simply have a big roll of string, it happens to be yellow, and I tie it to my tripod, because I have my camera on the tripod set where it's going to be, and then I simply go over and I touch the noses of each of the people to make sure, and so I can immediately see, okay, I'll have you lean in a little bit more and lean in a little bit more, okay, because it's such an important point, because you can get, now I'm using longer than normal lenses, so we don't have as much perspective problem, but still you do have perspective like Tom's been talking about. And so that helps a lot. And then the other thing I'm just bananas about is focus. I just don't like these autofocus things. I don't know how Tom feels about them, but I don't like them. So I always will start with just exactly what Tom's been talking about, with usually mom in the middle and then dad. And then I'll just have mom or dad hold something that I can look at and read right by the shoulder between the two of them, and I focus in on that just directly. I'm really bananas about focus.
Okay, and just to reiterate, when he's doing the stringing, he's just making sure that that string is taut between, so that, and then you just lean them forward, move them a little bit so that it touches their nose. Then you know without any question they're the same distance away. All right, next up is no heads on the same level as the person next to them. Tom, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, again, to create dynamics, one of the biggest problems I see in groups when I see family groups is there's just a row and or people next to each other. So somewhere within the group there may be another head on the same level, but they're further separated. So we're really talking right next to each other, whether it's mom and dad. Now in this case, yeah, mom and dad are kind of close to each other. This is my little triangle that I formed. This one's kind of a sideways pizza slice triangle, which always makes me hungry. But with moving dogs and so forth, and with the baby in the lap, dad normally would have been a little higher, but I think he kind of came down to keep control. And this ended up being a 24-30 wall portrait. So they loved it, and they loved their family, obviously. 4 boys, if you can imagine. And here's another example of there are no heads on the same level that are right next directly to each other. So dad and son in the back, kind of close, but the son's a little bit taller, and mom is kind of in between. And you can see this is a series of triangles. I love triangles as putting groups together, and this is a series of triangles within a triangle to give us that kind of composition. And this is the owner of a large moving van company in our area, and this was a substantial investment and substantial size in their home, and also one in their business lobby, which has brought me a lot of business.
Nice. And you just saw a little bit of that with a sideways orientation there, kind of. But you notice that the pyramid principle, the triangles, are an important part of everything Tom's doing. Tom, talk us through some specific examples of the pyramid posing principle here.
Yeah, if you get stuck, we're always looking for things like the oval is a perfect shape for the face. This comes from was isosceles or maybe some guy down the street. I'm not sure, but anyway, the triangles seem to really be a pleasing to the eye way to construct groups. And if you're stuck, just start thinking, okay, who's going to be in the top, who's in the middle, who's on the bottom, and start building your groups as you sketch them out in a triangle. There are other shapes, but for me, this is almost always the way I start in the groups. It's very pleasing, and as the group gets larger, there's another one where son and daughter, older, are in the back. Yeah, this is on the beautiful coast of Maine. I'm very lucky. This is not very far from where I live. It's gorgeous there. And so they wanted to go down to the coast. It was quite a climb and well worth it. And there's, again, a pyramid. Little girl in the middle just owned the whole thing. She was a riot. And this is a little variation. Some of the younger couples I photograph when we do the consultation don't care for a little more traditional sitting on the ground poses and don't want posing helpers. They just do a kind of a static standing, but still there's enough dynamics and love and feeling and closeness there, and it's a pyramid composition, so it still works. Even these types of groups, there's triangles within triangles within triangles, so it really helps you as you're going along. And yeah, again, with this size group and young children, sometimes a head gets sort of close, like grandmother and the little girl in the middle in the white, but because they're not both adults, that doesn't bother me as much. And they love this. And again, this is a wall size that is in grandmother's home. And of course, everybody gets smaller sizes of that as well.
Wonderful. You really get the sense of what those triangle shapes do for the composition, that especially on that last large one where you saw so many different triangles happening. All right, next up, huge money-making point. Make sure that you break the large group into smaller groups as well. Tom, talk us through a couple of examples of that. Here's a great example of a family right here.
Yeah, and that family there, the little sketch that I did, that's kind of the family I drew that sketch about, so that's kind of nice we're seeing that. This is obviously at their home, and we did individual portraits of both mom and dad and each of the girls alone, and then the girls together. We did a few other ones. I just didn't fit them all on this. This worked out very well for their investment. They were looking for something of each girl, and during the consultation, we figured that out. But every one I do of those can add several $100s to the bottom line each time, each one of those. So don't get lazy and say, I'm just going to do the group. That's close enough. It will be well worth it, and you're doing them a favor, because a lot of times they might not want to bother you, and they'll think, oh, I didn't want to bother you to ask you to do these. They're thrilled that you'll do these for them. Same thing with this group. This was at their home in the fall, and we did all kinds of subgroups and did even more than that, because the dogs, all those little subfamilies, but I just put a few samples on here. And again, this was a substantial investment, both in the wall sizes, but also all the extra small gift sizes. This is a family that comes back every year. I did the mom and dad senior portraits years ago, so I'm very used to working with them. And there's a real basic group. that is in the middle, and a little collage that I did to show off some of the approvals, or we call them approvals sometimes, meaning that we take those photographs, and even though they want them, there's no guarantee they're going to invest. If you do it right, they will every time. And that's just another example of, you know, want to double and triple your investment of what they're going to make sure you take those.
Nice. Fantastic. Wow, a lot of stuff jammed into this video, Tom. Really great stuff. Thank you for sharing all that. I've got some final thoughts for our members. What do you do now? Well, first and foremost, take one small step right now to implement what you discovered here. Don't let things stop here. Make sure you take a step when you're done. How can I implement just one of the small ideas that Tom gave me? Remember, successful photographers like you take action on the things that the failures won't do, don't want to do, whatever it is. Think differently, both in your photographic approach, but also in the way that you're running your business, and continue to take advice from those who are where you want to be. And as a member, you have access to the online vault. Visit it regularly. Go back time and time again. New stuff is being added constantly, and there's tons of stuff on there that you might have missed, especially if you haven't been a member for 5 or 10 years. You know, there's a lot of stuff on there that's as applicable today as it was the moment we recorded it. All right, well, gentlemen, that was a lot of stuff. Great getting to talk photography for a change. We hope all of you members enjoyed this. We're going to have another photographic video coming up next month for our members, and we'll also have a fantastic business one as well. So you're going to want to tune in for both of those videos being added to the online vault next month. Dad, I'm going to turn it over to you for about 30 seconds of last minute words, and then Tom will give you the final word.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Tom for doing such a wonderful job. His photography is beautiful, and you explained everything so nicely. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a very busy guy. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks. And you know, what I will say is that if you get known in your community as being an expert family portrait photographer, that's to me the ultimate. Yeah, I love photographing babies and high school seniors, but they all have families. And that is really for your business where you fly, because a lot of photographers don't market for, and are afraid almost of doing these bigger groups. Boy, oh boy, that's where the business is. I wouldn't be around if I didn't do those. So get good at this, and you'll really see your business explode.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dad. And yes, thank you, Tom, for sending us all those beautiful images and showing us all of those great details on each one. A lot of work, and we really appreciate it. I know our members do as well. Thank you all very much for watching this video. Tune in for our continued video programs coming up. Have a great rest of this month, and we'll talk to you again on the next video program. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.